Hello and welcome back to Nolan Financial Radio. I'm Tara Nolan from Nolan Financial. And for anyone who's just tuning into the show for the first time, I would definitely encourage you to go visit my website at www.taraenolan.com. And while you're there, you want to click on the radio page because we do this show every week and it's got a lot of educational value. So on the website, you can click on the radio page and there you can actually see a lot of past shows. We cover all kinds of financial topics from IRAs to 401ks to insurance to health insurance to Social Security, all kinds of different things. And so definitely click there. You can sign up on Apple Podcasts or Spotify to be notified. And, we do this show because finance and financial success starts with education and being able to ask good questions because there's so much information out there. There's no lack of information. So with this show, we try to give you a little insight so that you have a way to ask good questions. So today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite topics is debunking retirement myths. And we'll get into that. But before we jump into retirement myths, let me check in with my amazing co-host, Tony Shore. I finally got to meet Tony in person, and he is as great in person as he is on the radio.
I don't know about all that, Tara. Wow, what an introduction. But it was great to see you. For our listeners out there, we do this remotely, basically. And so I was out your way, finally, in Colorado. I took a trip with the fam, and it was great to see you and Chris out there. I can't believe everybody who goes out there to visit must say, I want to live here because it's so beautiful. There's so much to do and see. My family had a great time. I mean, we did everything from whitewater rafting. We went up and saw the Maroon Bells and, we saw a lot. So I think it's pretty amazing. We love Colorado. We stayed near, I think, Carbondale, Redstone area. Mm-hmm. Which is about, I think, 30 minutes north or so of Aspen. So great, beautiful country up there and just wonderful people. So we had a great time and it was great seeing you and Chris. And you even let Chris talk a little bit. We actually got to hear hear from Chris a little bit. I love that. And he's been meeting with a lot of listeners who have been setting up that the complimentary, no cost, no charge consultation. So I think that's great. But yeah, we had a great trip. Would love to go out to Colorado again. We just loved it.
It was fabulous. And I enjoy getting to meet your wife and your daughter. It's nice to put faces with all these people that you've been hearing about for years.
Yeah.
And so it was a lot of fun. But but today's show, Tony, is we're going to get into these myths. And I love it because I actually just was working on a chapter in my book on this very subject. So it's like perfect.
And well, you've been writing that book for a while now. How's that coming?
Well, I have 10 chapters completely done, 2 more to write, and it goes to my copy editor on July 1st next week. So I'm expecting some developmental edits back this week. And so I'm just going to this is what I'm doing 24 hours a day, getting this thing going. So it's
awesome.
Quite a process.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? Wow.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work.
Big term paper. Every chapter is a term paper.
Yeah, isn't that crazy? Well, yeah, and it makes you wonder how people like, you got guys like Stephen King out there or other authors who they write 1 or 2 books a year. You're like, how do they do it? Because it's a lot of work. I've tried. I get about a chapter.
Muscle.
Yeah, I've gotten about a chapter in on a book idea, and I'm like, yeah, no, that's too much work.
Well, I love it though, because I've been taking this class with AJ Harper and it's about the reader and you want to write a book. It's not about you. It's about sharing a story so that people understand what you're trying to share with them. It's not about what you have to say, but it's really a puzzle. And it's a lot of fun. And, but talking about these myths is just going to be, I'm really excited to be able to do this because the thing with myths is there's always a grain of truth in there, right?
Right. There is. And so we're going to I know you're going to debunk some retirement myths, but Tara, I want to throw in for fun some historical myths as well. I mean, you can't turn on the History Channel or Smithsonian Channel, like you say, without a show about myths and myth busting. So, I want to hear some retirement myths and, there's a lot of good information out there, right?
There's a ton of good information, and I love these things because these myths that you grow up were so hard because I mean you've heard them from the time you were a kid, and so
Yeah.
it's just really ingrained in there. And when you kind of get married to these beliefs, and you want to try to go, well, is that really true? Because
Yeah.
sometimes it's like a relief to go, oh, thank goodness that's not true.
Well, right. I mean, here's the problem: is there's you hear these myths about retirement that aren't true, but you probably also hear plenty of good information. So I think the challenge becomes, what's real and what's not. And I know that's why you wanted to do the show today.
It's what's real and what's not, Tony. And it's even more complicated because it's what's real for you. So like there's just these layers of complexity that get built into everything. And that's why it's so important to talk with an advisor that can help you sort through it all, because there's
Yeah.
things that are true, but maybe not true for you, or maybe not true
Right.
for somebody else. And so,
Exactly.
yeah. Anyway, so we're going to have some fun.
Yeah. So I think that it's what's a good, what do you want to start with? What's the first retirement myth you want to cover today?
Well, I think like the first big one that we should just jump right into is this myth is that once you're retired, you're just going to have a whole bunch of free time. And I think you have that. I think a lot of us think about retirement is it's almost like the same thing as vacation. So you're imagining yourself out there on your deck with your book, catching up on your reading,
Right.
or maybe you're going to do a lot of volunteer activities or do your hobbies or travel. And I think that's like the first myth, is that you're just going to retire and it's just going to be one big vacation.
It's going to be filled with hours of leisure time, right? I mean, I can't even begin, Tara, to count the number of people who I know once they retired, they assumed their days would be filled with all that leisure time, but instead they ended up being as busy or busier than they were when they were still working, because they're volunteering, maybe they're working part-time. But I think the important part of it is that almost all of them love what they're doing because they're doing what they didn't have time to do when they were still working or on the clock, right?
Absolutely, Tony. And the thing is that's better. I think the clients I have that really struggle are the ones that were so focused their whole lives on their job that all of a sudden they retire and they don't have a hobby. They never had
Right.
time for that. And they
Yeah.
don't know about volunteering. And they have to go back and relearn social skills. Like, how do I make friends?
That's
So
true.
it could almost be a little bit like going back to middle school or something, where you have
Sure.
to learn some of those basic skills. So,
Well, let me give you a historical myth that I've heard about history. And I don't know if you're aware of this one. I think everybody's heard the phrase, let them eat cake.
oh yeah,
You've
oh
heard
yeah.
that, right? Yeah.
Hmm.
And that was supposedly first uttered by Marie Antoinette, who was the last queen of France. She was told the French peasants couldn't afford bread. And they say that she said, let them eat cake. But in reality, there's actually no evidence that she ever said it. And it appears to be a myth that's been around for about 250 years.
Wow, that's crazy. There's like not even like any proof that she said it, and we all know that saying.
I know,
So,
I know. It's so funny,
but
and quotes and sayings get attributed to people who didn't say them all the time. I think in history back then, because record keeping, it was word of mouth
right,
more.
right,
So it wasn't instantly documented on someone's phone, right?
right,
Uh,
right.
so what's the next retirement myth you have for us?
Well, Tony, we're talking about cake, and so the next really common retirement myth that's out there is that retirement, that whole process, is just a piece of cake. And
Ah,
I can just tell you, being a financial advisor, there is like nothing happens until the paperwork is done. And
right.
that's true with your job. That's true with healthcare. That's true with anything in life, right?
Yeah.
Until the paperwork is signed, nothing happens. And so there's just mountains of paperwork to get it organized and
Hmm.
make sure you have taken control of your 401ks. Make sure you have the right insurance in place to protect your income streams, and make sure that you're looking at your social security properly. There's just all these. There's a lot of hoops to jump through. So it's doable, but it's not little. Remember when you were like just out of college and you had that 1040 easy form for your taxes, that one page?
Yeah. Remember
So
those days? Yeah.
It was good because your taxes were easy. It was bad because you didn't have any money, but
Right. Yeah. It's a double. Yeah.
but
It's a two-edged sword.
retirement's not that 10 easy form, 1040 easy. It's like the full deal.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it is the full deal because a lot of people think it's going to be easier in retirement, but you can get overwhelmed, and I appreciate you talking about this because I think that feeling of being overwhelmed is natural, and you've probably
Mhm.
seen it with a lot of people that come to you. They're overwhelmed when they try to think about trying to plan for retirement because it's important to know that other people have gone through it. They've felt what you're feeling. And I think this is a good time to point out that a way to deal with that and not have to be so overwhelmed is to work with someone like yourself, a financial services professional who's going to help you navigate through that process. So, before you go on with retirement myths, I'm going to throw out one that I did not know. I was looking up some historical myths for the show. I did not know this one. I think it's pretty surprising. The Declaration of Independence wasn't actually signed on July 4th, 1776. Congress approved the document's language on that date, and that's the day we celebrate the signing of the Declaration of Independence, but it wasn't officially signed until August 2nd of that year. So it was almost a month after July 4th that it was actually signed. So, what's another common retirement myth?
Well, I was just laughing, like we said, until the paperwork's done.
Yeah, there you go. It ties right in with your point about nothing happens until the paperwork gets done. Yeah.
Well, here's one of the biggest myths, Tony, that's out there that we really try to educate people about for taxes and retirement. Is there's this myth out there that your taxes are going to be lower in retirement.
I
And
used to think that, and I know a lot of people who did think that. Even my parents thought that.
well, and I think it maybe at some point it used to be true, maybe back when there was like a single family income or something. But the way it works now with the tax code, a lot of the deductions that you've had your whole life, like your mortgage payment and your kids and your dependents and the things that you get to claim as deductions are gone. And so you don't
Yep.
get some of those tax breaks. And then you're making, a lot of people have done a good job in retirement, so that they've got some pensions and they've got some 401ks coming in, so they've got actually some pretty good resources. And here's the thing, I think someone told me once, if you have to pay taxes, don't complain about that. That means you've done well.
Yeah.
And
That's true,
so,
I guess.
but Tony, this is a big thing that we do. Chris and I are going to be doing a lot of seminars this coming up this summer and this fall about taxes and retirement, because one of the big things we want to look at is how do we get as much of your money from a taxable state like a traditional 401k or IRA over into something tax-free like a Roth,
Right.
as much as possible, because if you can get your everything in a tax-free zone, it lowers the tax bracket that you're going to be in. And that's what this myth is all about, Tony. Is the myth is assuming that when you retire, you're going to be making less money, and so you'll be in a lower tax bracket. And it's just not true for a lot of people. It's really, I say it's a myth because for most people, that's just not true anymore.
Well, yeah, that's true. It probably isn't, and so it gets more and more. Plus, the tax code just every year gets more and more complicated. They add
Mhm.
more taxes, and so in retirement, it's become complicated with all the different types of retirement accounts. Usually, they're tax deferred, so that means that they can be that ticking tax time bomb in retirement because you've deferred taxes as you've been paying into these retirement accounts, but you deferred them until you're retired. So,
Right.
yeah, and I think that's an interesting one. But let's take a minute here, Tara, to let our listeners know how they can get a hold of you and Chris to set up that no charge, no obligation consultation to talk about getting a plan in place.
Sure, Tony. This gets me really excited with people because uh, you can give Chris and I a call at 719-210-4242. And Tony, it's really the folks listening that are looking at their retirement and saying, am I as close to tax-free as I can be for retirement so that I can intentionally get myself into that lowest tax break position possible? And that's what Chris and I really like doing with people right now, is helping them put that puzzle together, because you've done this good job of growing your 401k and growing your IRAs and having all these resources available. And now the key is to let them blend together so that you get to keep as much of it as possible. So Tony, that number is 719-210-4242. Give Chris and I a call to set up that complimentary appointment. So that way we can make sure that you are positioned as best as you can be for retirement success.
All right, that sounds great. And sorry, I had to disappear from view here. I had to work on some cords. My computer's like, it's not charging, so I had to make sure my computer was. It had become unplugged, and we were on standby power there for a second. I was a little worried, but I love technology, and you know that, Tara. We both love technology as we do the show each week. But yeah, I think it's great. And you and Chris, I know Chris has been busy meeting with people, and you've been working on the book and doing this show each week. This is awesome. Now, what's the next interesting myth that you have for us regarding retirement?
Well, here's this next myth, Tony, that's actually, it's gotten really common, is a lot of people think that Social Security is going to replace almost 40% of their pre-retirement income. And it's out there because Social Security is great, right? Because everybody gets it and it doesn't matter your health. Like, you don't have to pass a medical exam to qualify for it. You've paid into it. So it's a guaranteed part of your income stream. But the thing is, Tony, is, as you know, from the 70s when pensions started going away, mentally, a lot of people just replaced Social Security as their new pension. And Social Security was never designed to be a pension. It was designed to be an added entitlement, basically for poor elderly people to make sure they didn't starve to death. It wasn't ever designed to be an actual pension to live on. And so while it's a good foundation and you pay into it, so you've earned it and it's great to have, you cannot count on that as your sole primary source of income.
Right. And I think you nailed this one. Honestly, I can't begin to tell you how many people and coworkers I've come across, especially if they're a little younger, who believe that Social Security is all they're going to need to enjoy a healthy and safe retirement. You cannot live 100% on Social Security. It's just not enough to live on anymore. And like you said, for most people, the reality is it's probably going to replace around 40% of their pre-retirement income. So you got to figure out, what are you going to do for the other 60%? And I know that, again, that's where you come in, work with a financial services professional as soon as possible to make sure you have a plan in place. So let me throw out another historical myth. And this one's always funny. I get a kick out of this one because Napoleon, Napoleon was a crazy character in history because, I think it's often suggested that Napoleon was driven to expand France's empire, increase his own personal power, and he was always worried about his reputation because of his small physical stature, and he was doing that to make up for it. But in truth, Napoleon was actually 5'7" tall, which is actually slightly taller than the average height back then. So at the time. So I think that's a fascinating one because we always picture Napoleon really short. I mean, like,
right. So it makes you wonder, like, how did that develop that he was a short guy if he was actually on the tall side?
Yeah. And it wasn't super tall. I mean, 5'7". I'm consider myself short and I'm 5'8", but that's not that short, right? So that is an interesting one. I doubt Tom Cruise is even 5'7". But
starting another myth.
Yeah. All right.
So that feeds right into this next myth, Tony, and because, like we talked about, every myth there's grains of truth in them, and there's a big belief out there that you're only going to need about 70% of your income when you retire, and this is a tough one, right? Because the reason people think that is you're going to have your house paid off, and you're going to have maybe I have had a few clients, Tony, actually buy a brand new house in retirement because that was their dream.
People do that.
But this idea that you're going to need less in retirement is that, well, you're going to have more of your debt paid off. Your kids are going to be out of the house. So you're just not going to have as many of those drains on your finances. And that can be true for some people, Tony. But here's the thing is, I think that used to be true, but now we're living so much longer and we're staying healthy so much longer that when people retire, now they're traveling and they're being involved and they're doing a lot more things. So your need for money doesn't really change. So I think the planning factor, you should try to plan to live on whatever you've been living on and start there. And if you have extra money, that's okay. But don't plan on like trying to make your life smaller when you retire, because that's when you're going to actually have that best resource of all, time, right? This is why we make money, is so that we have time to enjoy things. And so
Yeah.
this myth that you are going to need less money in retirement, I think we don't want to believe that. We don't want to plan that way.
Yeah. In retirement, you're going to need more money to live. And that doesn't mean necessarily monthly bills, but to actually go out and live life. Right now, you're working, you're doing family stuff, you're doing that type of thing, which is your life right now. But in retirement, you actually will need money to live, like to travel, to do those hobbies that you've had. And so I think a lot of people don't, they discount that. And who wants to take a pay cut in retirement, right? I don't. I don't want to take a pay cut in retirement, but you're right. I mean, I'm glad you pointed out some of your biggest expenses, like mortgages, might go away. Not everyone. And that means you might not need quite as much income, but you're going to be spending more because every day is a Saturday, right? And when do you spend money? You always tell me this, Tara. I'm stealing your thunder. You always say, Tony, when do you spend the most money? On Saturday. Well, in retirement, every day is Saturday for you. So yeah, whoops, there goes the money. So I think you have to really be a good saver for your retirement funds. Now, what about, let's see here. What about another historical myth? What do I have? Oh yeah, if you've ever heard, a parent or somebody trying to console you if you fail a math test when you were a kid, they might say, well, even Einstein failed a math test when he was a kid. But that's actually not true. I've heard that one.
I used to have nightmares about subtraction in second grade. I remember those.
I had division was especially when you had to multiply and divide fractions. I'm bad with fractions. So, but the truth is, even though your parents' heart was in the right place, trying to say, "Oh, don't worry about it," even Einstein, failed a math test. That's a myth, because at age 11, Einstein was actually already entertaining himself by reading college-level physics books. And as far as we know, he never failed a math test. He was kind of a savant when it comes to math. So what's the next retirement myth you have for us?
Well, this one's a great one, Tony. Is the myth is that you're going to be able to retire exactly when you want to. And I mean, if you have that crystal ball, or your life has been that nice, pretty line, then you are the rare exception. Because I can tell you, my life from when I started in college to where I am now has not been any kind of a straight line. And I have taken a lot of detours and turns that I didn't ever planned on. So this idea that people think, well, I'm going to retire at 65 because that's when you retire. Good luck with that. Because it just doesn't happen. And I can tell you, I've shared this story before, Tony, like with my mom. She went to med school late, right? She was a nurse, and then she went back to med school at 40. So when she got to 65, all her friends were retiring, a lot of them, and she wanted to retire. And I'm like, but you've only been a doctor for about 15 years now.
Right.
And you went to a lot of effort to get this skill and have this profession. And we had to go through a phase, and she got everything lined up, and she's like, I'm going to retire at 65. And Tony, I tell you what, not a month later, she had an offer to come back and teach at the school, and she was back working. But we had to go through this whole process where we had to stop her Social Security and do this. And life just doesn't always go the way we think it's going to go.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. And a lot of people, I hear that story so many times, Tara, from you and Chris, and from other people, even directly people I know who retire thinking, oh, I want to retire. And some of them are like, I'm going to retire early. I'm retiring at 62, and I'm going to start drawing my Social Security early. And I know it's a reduced amount, but I want to retire early because I can. A month later, they're back to work because they were bored out of their minds, or in their case, people are working longer, so they're retired, but people their age weren't retired. And so they didn't know what to do with their time, and they missed the job. So a lot of people end up going back to work after they retire, don't they?
But that's true, Tony. But the flip side can also happen is I have met some people that for health reasons, they had to retire early, or for family obligations, because they had to take care of elderly parents that needed that full-time care. So sometimes you also have to retire earlier than you plan on it. And either way, it's always nice, Tony, when we can get you in the driver's seat with your money so that you get to be in control and as much as possible.
That's
Life
huge.
is going to happen, but it's nice. We like to try to, with our finances, create plans that great options. So then when all these random things that life throws at you come at you, you have a little bit of room to make some decisions, and you're not just at the mercy of life.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. And so you got to watch out for some of these myths about retirement. Now, one of my favorite historical myths, and I wanted to throw this one out there because it's radio related. You've probably heard of it. Hopefully, most of our listeners are familiar with the War of the Worlds in 1938. They made a radio version of H.G. Wells's story, The War of the Worlds, about an alien attack. And they broadcast it on the radio and made it sound like an actual broadcast. And the myth is it caused mass panic across the country because people believed it was really happening. In reality, they did put a disclaimer before they played it and afterwards. But the mass panic was really nothing more than a handful, about 10 confused people who missed the disclaimer. And so they called CBS and they called their local radio station saying, hey, is this really happening? What's going on? But it wasn't mass panic. It might have been 5 to 10 people, they think, that, bought into it and called. But it still was famous. A lot of people loved it. A lot of kids were like, whoa, and their parents were kind of chuckling. And so I think they had fun with it, but there was no mass panic. So what about a retirement myth?
Well, here's another one that kind of dovetails with what we were just talking about, Tony, is people think that significant health issues are just not going to occur until you're old. And, a lot of years after you've retired. And it's just interesting how a lot of these myths, I think, are based on like the way we would like it to happen.
That's true.
Like, we all go, well, I'm going to retire,
yeah,
and I'm going to enjoy retirement. And
yep.
then, maybe I'll have some health issues later. And the other thing, Tony, too, is funny is I just realized that I am now going in that 50 and over category, and AARP actually like markets to people like me. And I'm like, I'm still building my business. I'm not ready to be retired. So, but this idea that you get to control things. Like, what is that joke? How do you want to make God laugh? Tell him your plans.
Yeah. Man plans, God laughs.
And so I think that this is kind of what this myth is about is you hope that you're going to be healthy and you're going to not have those things. But I can tell you what, Tony, when I was going down to Florida with the horses, and I was at Venice, Florida, and there was a lot of retirement people there, and you could see the people who had really taken care of themselves and were pretty active, but you could see the people that were just like permanently hunched over because they had spent all that time on their computers working their careers. And so you just don't get to control those things. And so this myth that you get to plan when you're healthy. Here's the thing, that there's going to be health issues at some point. So we need to plan for them. And we want to plan something that's as flexible as possible so that you're not locked in with the money, but you want to plan for it because it will happen, because it just does.
It always does. Yeah.
I mean, very few people just wake up and keel over and die. That just really doesn't happen very often.
True. Well, we've covered a lot of fun myths, historical and retirement, but we're out of time. On that note, hey, we're out of time, actually. Yeah. We ran out of time. Wish we had that DeLorean, the time machine, to go back to the future or back in time. But Tara, why don't you let our listeners know once again how they can get a hold of you?
Sure, Tony. So this show today has been about debunking those myths and really setting yourself up for success in retirement. So Chris and I have set aside 20 complimentary appointments for those first 20 callers from today's show. The number 719-210-4242. Give us a call if you're really ready to sit down and look at everything you have and go, okay, do I have everything organized so that I can maximize my potential with all the work that I've done? So Tony, that number is 719-210-4242. And great show today.
Great show. I think that's awesome, Tara. And we did some serious myth busting. I love it. Well, listeners, that does it for today's episode of Nolan Financial Radio with our host, Tara Nolan.
Join us soon for a new episode of Nolan Financial Radio. Take care, and we'll talk with you next time.